Now, this is a concern. It may be a lot of jargon to many people, but it does affect us. It may affect you and you may not be aware of it. And so to get this conversation into context, to understand what exactly this attack is, what it means, and what you should look out for as be it a business person or just an individual or part of a company, I'm joined by William Makatiani, who's the CEO of Serianu. And his job basically is to figure out, he's an IT guy, and their job is to get into the cyber attack issues and to give us a bit of expounding details on this. Welcome. So maybe you can tell us what exactly is this ransomware and what exactly is it doing to the systems?
Okay, so what it is simply is an application. So the same way you'll be able to go out and download an application that helps you maybe process payments, maybe go out and process a Word document. You also have applications that are malicious. In other words, when you deploy them on your system, they're not really meant for any good. This particular application, when you download it, it goes into your systems, collects all your critical systems, and encrypts. What encrypt means, it denies you access to those systems or those applications or the documents you've developed, and forces you to pay some money using bitcoins before you can be able to get access to those. So it sort of like creates its own password to restrict access to those systems.
Right. And so when we talk about it's like people are being used as agents without even knowing. How does it happen? Say, for example, I know that if I was using my laptop at home, using internet at home, when I come to the office, it could be used as an agent of these hackers. How exactly does that work?
So the way the internet works is once you connect to the web, you're open. And therefore, if you have any vulnerabilities, whether I'm sitting in Ukraine, Russia, or the US, if I scan the web and I can be able to get to your computer, I can start using that computer to attack other people. What this malware has done, or this malicious software has done, and the perpetrators have done, really they've gone out and they've looked for a lot of other systems that are vulnerable, and they're using those systems to spread the malicious software. In your particular case, as the example you gave, if you're at home, you've not secured your network, and someone can be able to access that particular computer, they will leave some type of application in the system. When you go to work, it will now show up. Now, what's unique about this particular software is it's a worm. And in technology terms, when you call something a worm, it means it can move around the network without you even identifying that it's moving on your network. And that's why it's very, very malicious and dangerous. All
right. And so what does this mean for the people who, for instance, will go and sit at a restaurant for a certain number of hours to work, especially entrepreneurs, because they probably have not gotten to a place where they can actually rent office space. And so I sit at a restaurant somewhere and I log on to their internet. That means you become an easy target for that. And is it now part of the restaurant's responsibility to ensure that they secure their network?
So it becomes very interesting in terms of responsibility, but I think you as the user that is logging onto the network, you should be responsible for the device. As we know, probably if you're not in control of the network, if you cannot be able to detect what traffic is coming in and going out of that network, probably you don't want to connect to that network. And therefore, if you go to one of these restaurants, talk to them, find out, are you secure against a particular virus? Are you doing any monitoring before you connect to that? But also, you should have your own antivirus in place so that you know if something happens, you're not going to be affected. But above all that, if you don't have backups, really, it means you have an exposure that you need to address.
And you've talked about the antiviruses, and there's some people who have cracked ones. You know, they're not the original ones. So those ones, are they safe in any way, really?
I wouldn't say they are safe, because when you have an application that is cracked, it becomes very difficult for you to get updates from the main servers of that particular provider. So you're really exposed. They will not recognize you as a customer, and therefore they have no responsibility to update your system. And therefore you are exposed and it's illegal.
All right. And so what exactly should one do to ensure that they can avoid being attacked? Or is it a case of you just sit and pray that you don't get attacked because you probably have no control over that?
There's some precautionary measures you can take. The first thing you want to make sure you have is you have backups of your key documents. If you're an individual user, you're the entrepreneur who's moving around with one laptop, back up your system, get a flash drive. If you're using one of these cloud systems, be it Dropbox or Google or Microsoft Cloud, back up your systems. That's number one. Number two, make sure that you have an antivirus that works, and make sure that you're updating those particular antivirus. When that is done, also make sure that you're patching your system. Microsoft has released patches for all their systems in the past 3 days. Log on to the website or get a friend who has a copy of it, or get it onto a flash drive, upload it. When that is done, then make sure that you do not connect to networks that you're not in control of. Don't click on links. If you're a business, the first thing we're advising businesses to do is, if possible, if you don't need your users to access the internet for business purposes, disconnect the internet connection for your users. Identify all the systems on your network that are vulnerable. The listing is out there, it's the key Microsoft systems. Identify those, patch them. Once you've patched them, again, make sure your backups are working, and then bring back users online one by one. Restrict most users who are coming in with devices from home or from other networks until you know your control. And then above all, monitor your network. We have a list of IPs that are public, that we know where these attacks are coming from. Make sure that you're not connecting to IP addresses that have been compromised. Otherwise, it becomes really a question.
But how then if it's compromised?
If you're monitoring, we know the indicators. So like any other attack, there are indicators of compromise. And when you say indicators of compromise is their IP addresses. If you're communicating with those particular IP addresses, it shows that this software is already on your network. There are also different applications that this malware downloads onto your system or your network. If you're tracking your traffic on your network, we know what those look like. They're public, and you can be able to put in and be able to monitor what you're getting. And therefore, you don't have to wait to get the screen telling you have to pay $300 or $600 before you know you're compromised.
Okay, and you've talked about patching. Maybe just break it down.
Okay.
It might be IT jargon,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
just for the sake of someone who may not understand what patching is and they are very interested. What exactly is it?
Okay, so like any other system, the way we develop systems, the way you develop applications, when you develop the applications, you develop based on what you know at that particular time. And therefore, you leave space to be able to come back and say, okay, I need to patch this section because something has happened. I'll give a very good example. If you live in a home, you'll build a wall around your compound. Now, if it just happens at some stage, maybe it rains too hard and part of the wall drops, you have a vulnerability there where somebody can walk through that particular hole and come into your house. The same thing happens in applications. When you build the application, you might leave some spaces, and maybe for one reason or the other, maybe memory problem, or maybe hackers discover something, and they open up a hole in the defenses you've put in. That limits your ability to control who comes in. What the software developer does is they release a new piece of that application and tell you, use this to be able to block that space that has opened up. And that is what we call patching in technology terms.
Okay, and I know there are people who may have heard that if I'm exposed to a certain network, I may not know whether it's one that will leave me vulnerable to the attack or otherwise. Does this affect phones? I know it's based on the Windows OS system, but many people usually connect their phones to Wi-Fi. Go to an office, go to a restaurant, or is it, and if so, is it only Windows phones because there's some which run on Windows OS, or does it not affect phones at all?
So based on the reports we are getting, and the reports or the incidents we're investigating, most of the attacks are targeting Windows systems OS. So we've not seen anything on the phone side of things. But again, these attacks come out every day. The fact that these have been very successful, I'm sure somebody's sitting somewhere and saying, why can't I try the different, be it Android, be it Mac OS, be it even the OS mobile version. And therefore, it's just a precaution that everyone should take. Go out, look at your application, update it, and patch it. Because as you can tell, most of this software came from the NSA website, and there are a lot of tools there that are targeting mobile phones, that are targeting different devices. And therefore, while we've not seen attacks targeting the mobile environment, we're still very, very cautious and advising everyone to patch up their systems.
Okay, and so now if we can just get examples of the impact on different sectors. For example, what would we expect to see if, say, they hit a bank? If these hackers on ransomware hit a bank, what some people may be fearing it will siphon their money.
Yes.
But what exactly would happen in the case of a bank, for instance?
So ideally, most of the cases we've seen a denial of service, and denial of a service from the sense that once the malicious software takes over your files, if it's a server, as you can tell nowadays, everything, even I'm sure the systems we're using here are relying some information that's sitting on a server. If we are not able to access those servers, what that really means is there is no way you'll be able to provide service. You'll not be able to communicate. You'll not be able to get email. In the case of a bank, if you go out and you take over the database of a bank, Literally, it means you'll not be able to pass transactions. If there are malicious users, they can now be able to get any systems that are not being able to authenticate to siphon money out. If it's a hospital, for example, if you have x-rays or you need to call the insurance company before you get some approvals, you'll not be able to do that for a whole day. And therefore, you're seeing different application in different industries. We've had cases in Europe where an entire railway system has not been operational because of the case. We've had companies that do manufacturing where you do not have access to different design documents, or even the company has been shut down completely. So it's varied, but the key problem here is we're relying on servers, we're relying on machines that are holding information. If you block access to those machines, it becomes a challenge. For the home user, for the individual entrepreneur, the key problem here, you lose your files. Because if you don't pay within a certain amount of time, maybe 2 to 3 days, the files will be deleted.
Right.
And that becomes a challenge.
And do we have maybe statistics on what percentage of Kenyan companies rely on Windows-based operating system for their backup?
Okay, so there's some statistics that look at almost 80% of our servers are based on Windows. We have another almost 16% that rely on Unix or the Linux variant, and then you have other operating systems. So pretty much 80%.
So we are fairly vulnerable as Kenya right now.
We are very, very vulnerable. And we do scans a lot. We do public scans of different IP addresses. And just in our report last year, what we did identify is this particular port or service that is being targeted, the SMB or 445 port, it's vulnerable. We have almost 100,000 computers that have that port open in Kenya alone. So that shows you the vulnerability levels are really, really high.
Right. And what this means pretty much is that to some extent it's okay to be analog.
Yes.
It's good to have some analog, because if it seems like it's more of a threat to those who are fully automated.
Yes. And I think, I mean, if you think about it, in Europe, the cases have moved very fast. Here, we do have some cases where sometimes you don't have internet for a certain amount of time. And those are just the cases that are allowing us to sit back and say, maybe we're not seeing a lot of cases yet because most of these people are not connected. And as you say, again, it does help. Just the same way ignorance at times is a good security control. The same in this case, being analog or not being connected, not being too connected is a good thing.
Right. And so for you who usually does the, you scan and you can actually tell which have been hit, and maybe you've gotten some people who've actually reported. As of now, it's 12:28 p.m.
Yes.
Have you gotten any reports locally of people who've been attacked? Because I know over the weekend must have been silent because most people are not working.
Okay.
Yes.
So there are almost 5 cases, but again, until these particular organizations come out and talk publicly about these cases, you can't go out and start presenting the case, but there are almost 5 cases that we've been able to monitor in Kenya, and those cases are actually, the IP addresses are known. But in terms of have they come out and publicly spoken about it, we can't get to that detail yet, yes. But the cases in Kenya, there are almost 5 cases in Kenya. And
it's likely to increase because as you go along the day, those who are not working over the weekend are now coming back online and are actually now getting to realize that they've actually been attacked. So we are likely to see more. Yes,
no, we are likely to see more cases as we get into the week. As all these networks open up, we'll start seeing a lot more cases. The question is, are they going to report? Because in Europe, you were required by the government to report these cases. Here, unless someone calls you and tells you, I've seen this or I've seen that, or in cases where, in this particular case, we have access to certain IP addresses that have been compromised, because when you're compromised, it reports back to the control center to say you've been compromised. So in our case, you're able to see some of those IP addresses. But the problem here is most people will not go out because they are not required to report the cases.
Right. Thank you very much, William Akacheni, who's the CEO of Serrano, who's been giving us some insight in terms of the cyber attack that's been happening and the fact that Kenya is actually quite vulnerable, not quite, very vulnerable, if you consider the statistics that he shared with us, that about 80% of the companies in the country are reliant on Windows OS, and which means that these are the primary targets for these hackers. So